I'm laughing because the last thing in the world that I'm doing is looking. Maybe I'll be really lucky and I never have to write another book. But then something will happen and you'll go, oh, oh no, that's the end of that. Now I have to do it again, basically. I'm now coming off this kind of crazy experience where I was writing 2 books at once, and I'm on final revisions of the first one, which became the second one, which is now coming out in the spring.
Congrats.
And that's the last thing in the world I want to do is write a novel.
Before we jump in, just a little context for you. This conversation is with Jean Hanff Korelitz, and it was recorded live inside of one of our classes. Jean is the author of The Plot, The Undoing, and Admission, with multiple books adapted for film and television. She's also someone who brings a very honest and at times quite blunt perspective on what writing actually is. What made this conversation especially valuable is how she really cuts out a lot of the myths around writing and authorship today. We talk about why starting before you have everything figured out is essential, why most people don't actually have a book idea the way that they think that they do, and how doubt and self-criticism are not occasional, they're actually constant, especially if you want to be a working author today. We get into where ideas really come from, how long they can take to develop, and why writing is less about certainty and more about this process of discovery, especially something if you're looking to produce work that's meaningful and drives impact. If you're trying to write something real and meaningful and not just thinking about writing, this conversation will definitely recalibrate how you think about the work. So really grateful to have Jean joining us. And I think there's bunches of reasons that I'm excited to have her, but I was reading an interview and she described her career as, I am the opposite of an overnight success. And I think it's really powerful for us as writers, as authors, as participants in this book world to know that it's not oftentimes as linear or as clear as it takes, but part of it is like being persistent. Her latest book, The Plot, has been a breakaway success. It was named by the Jimmy Fallon Tonight Show as one of the books of the summer. And it really details this interesting story about the writing world, about publishing, plagiarism, all those things. But really her writing has been very well loved as she talks about it. Sometimes surprising how they've adapted into film. Her book was adapted into Admission, which you may have seen, that starred Paul Rudd and Tina Fey. Another book of hers was adapted into The Undoing on HBO by David Kelly, which is about starring Hugh Grant and Nicole Kidman. So her work has this translated ability to it. And I think a lot of it is because of both the plots that she develops, the stories, but also the characters. I think these rich characters are really a big part her success and why I think these sort of stories are so beloved. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that. What was it like to write a book in this way? Because it's obviously a little meta, right? Like writing a book about the book world and writing. Like, how did you disentangle that from like your journey to keep the story? Like, how do you make sure that it's an interesting story, even if you're not like in the inside baseball part of this world?
I had never heard the term inside baseball until I wrote this book. And
Really?
it's
Interesting.
counterintuitive because it's not about baseball at all. There's this kind of conventional wisdom that readers don't like to read about writers. I've never been able to test that because I love to read books about writers. I read any book about a writer, really. Some of them are laughably off base. I just wonder, like, who wrote this? Are you a writer? But to my surprise, and that was hanging over me. That was one of the many things hanging over me as I wrote it. Who cares? Nobody wants to look behind the curtain. They don't care about, it's hard to get an agent and the special envy of watching somebody who you don't think is really that good get chosen by Oprah, the special pain that comes with getting a terrible review, seemingly the only terrible review that's ever been written. But I guess people do this because over and over again, I've heard, I really loved all the publishing stuff. If your editor, whom you trust, as I do mine, says this is too inside baseball, I cut it. But nobody asked me to cut it, and people have really enjoyed it. So nobody's more surprised than I am.
Have you found a lot of people coming to you saying, I've always wanted to write a book and this has gotten me thinking about it or starting it? Or
I'm smiling because my friend Carol Fitzgerald, who runs the website bookreporter.com, which is really one, perhaps the only, but certainly one of the very few websites that has ever truly mastered the chimerical world of book groups. Book groups are so ephemeral. They just flow through your fingers. In fact, Carol once told me that the average life of a book group in America is 3 years, which is not very long. But she also told me that she read some article, or there was actually a study, or somebody studied this, that when people say, I have a great idea for a book, and then they're asked to describe it, it usually comes down to 4 sentences. They have a 4-sentence idea, and a book is a lot more than one. So when they say, oh, I have a great idea, you use my story, you write the book, and we'll split the money. This is something that many people have said to many writers, including myself. And it's a whole lot more than 4 sentences. It has to be all that.
How do some of these processes come? Do you find a character? Do you find the seeds of a story? Is there a process that goes from, hey, these are some interesting thoughts, into I'm passionate about spending X number of years on this thing? Like, how does it go from that to like, all right, now we're going to go?
There have been novels that I've written that literally took 20 years of thinking about before I wrote the first word. And 2 of my books are based on other stories, which sounds like a radical thing, although maybe after reading the plot, it's not that radical. But I wrote a novel that was based on the opera Der Rosenkavalier. It was Der Rosenkavalier moved from 18th century Germany to the Upper West Side of Manhattan in the 1990s. That was enough to go in many different directions and talk about things that had nothing to do with the original opera. I also wrote a novel that combined the Scarlet Letter with an Irish murder case. So something that takes decades for these kind of ideas to rise and then converge. On the other hand, there have been a couple of stories that just came out of nowhere and seemed not fully formed, because you don't want it fully formed when you're starting to write. You want to discover as you go. But that were a lot quicker. I was having brunch with somebody, and they mentioned something that happened at Wesleyan in the 1990s, which I guess I was busy raising little kids in the 1990s. I wasn't reading the New York Times every day. I missed this story, but it was so perfect for me that I knew instantly that I was going to write a book that began with those true events. It went very far from them, but it became my novel, The Devil and Webster. They can come from anywhere. They can take a long time. They can be really sudden. The connective tissue has always been that there's something in the story that just makes me go, I don't want to curse, but what the fuck? What somebody did that really happen? Could that really happen? What would happen if you took an opera set in 18th century Germany, Vienna, whatever, not Germany, and moved it to New York and made everybody Jewish? What would that be like? I don't think you need to be prescriptive about where it comes from.
As ideas are flowing across your plate, are there things that you like, I guess, as you're looking for your next projects and things like that, how do you keep yourself like always open to the universe telling you these things? Or is it just, you just don't know?
Sorry, I'm laughing because the last thing in the world that I'm doing is looking. Maybe I'll be really lucky and I never have to write another book, but then something will happen and you'll go, oh no, that's the end of that. Now I have to do it again, basically. I'm now coming off this kind of crazy experience where I was writing 2 books at once, and I'm on final revisions of the first one, which became the second one, which is now coming out in the spring.
Congrats.
And the last thing in the world I want to do is write a novel. But I'll kick back, I'll read 100 books, whatever. And then one day I'll go, oh shit, I have to do that. So that's how it will be, probably. I have no idea what it will be, but I'm really due a nice long vacation after this. I can tell you what I will not ever be writing about, and that is a pandemic or a virus or anything even vaguely apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic. I could never bear those stories. And I was the one running around screaming 18 months ago that we were all in the opening chapters of The Stand, and nobody believed me.
Do you think there's something that you've learned about how to make writing that is translatable into other things? Is there something about them that is it just these were great stories, great characters, or that you wrote them in a way that, like, I guess, what is the sort of sense that I guess you got of why they translate?
I don't know what the secret is. Whatever it is, I don't know it, because like my books are so internal. When admission was optioned, I thought, what? How are they going to do that? This is the action of admission. She's sitting there at her desk reading a folder. That's the action. It took writers and directors, whatever, with a different skill set to find the action in that. And with You Should Have Known, which became The Undoing, I was in the hands of a guy whose work I've been watching for 20 years.
We all
25
have, right? Yeah.
So I was hardly going to question anything he did, but what came out of it was something that really was so different from what I had written, to the point that I can't even bear to take compliments from people who liked the TV show, because I've been in groups where people said, "How did you get the idea for that big twist in the courtroom?" And I'm like, that wasn't me. There was no court. There was no trial. There was no husband in that book. He was gone from the beginning. He really took the characters in the situation and he went in a different direction, which I knew he was going to do. But it does give me a rather surreal and distanced relationship to the final product.